Welcome to the Ruminate Exhibition Artist Talk hosted by the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking. I'm Jerusha Graham, the museum coordinator and moderator for the talk. Tonight, the three artists featured in Ruminate, Lea Basile-Lazarus, Chad Hayward, and Andrea Peterson will talk about their work, and we'll close out the evening with a Q&A. Please note that as attendees, your audio and video have been turned off, but you can share comments and questions via our chat, as well as the Q&A button. This artist talk will also be broadcasting on Facebook Live. Let me start by introducing our first speaker, Andrea Peterson. Ms. Peterson is an artist and educator based in LaPorte, Indiana. She received her MFA from the University of Minnesota in 1994 and BFA from the Art Institute of Chicago. She currently teaches papermaking and book arts from her studio Hook Pottery Paper and abroad. Hook Pottery Paper, which is a joint venture with her husband, ceramic artist John Hook. At the studio, she creates her artwork, conducts paper research, and produces paper that is sold internationally. Andrea was a 2016-17 grant recipient from the Indiana Arts Commission. She creates paper artworks and relief printed images on handmade sheets of paper that have utilized pulp drawing techniques. She also creates site-specific installation work and book art pieces. Peterson combines these efforts to make works that address human relationship to the environment. Most of her work can be found in private collections as well as corporate collections such as Hollister Clothing, Chicago, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art for their Paper Legacy collection, to name a few. Andrea Peterson's work has been exhibited internationally, such as Deggendorf Museum in Germany, Steyermühle Paper Museum in Austria, the Scuola de Grafica in Venice, Italy, Fort Wayne Museum of Art in Indiana, Columbia College Chicago Book and Paper Center, Illinois, Frankfurt Library in Indiana, and the Lubznik Art Center, Michigan City, Indiana. She has conducted workshops and lectures at Steyermühle Paper Museum in Austria, University of Georgia's Cortona, Italy program, Scuola de Grafica in Venice, Italy, University of Syracuse, and multiple Friends with Art Hunter National Papermaking Conferences. She currently teaches at the School of the Art Institute in the Fiber and Material Studies program.
Thank you. Thank you, Jerusha. And thank you to the Robert C. Williams Museum for this opportunity for all of us here to share our work. It's very exciting to be there. Ruminate, I think, we look it up in the dictionary, it means to think deeply. In the definition, it also includes of a ruminant, which is where we get the phrase to chew on something. A goat is a ruminant, cow, deer, and that process is literally to chew the cud. I think all of us have lived, Leah and Chad and I, have lived a fair amount of time in the Midwest in which we truly understand the culture of chewing on cud, thinking it over deeply for a length of time. My husband and I created Hook Pottery Paper in Northwest Indiana 23 years ago on our homestead, which is a fine arts gallery and art studios, ceramics, paper arts, print, and artist books. This facility was founded with the intention to create works of art and research in an environmentally sustainable manner and to live life to the fullest with a bit of humor. The studios fostered international and national artist-assisted residencies and internships as well. The studios and farm work toward a symbiotic relationship. It is cyclical experience and existence. When I design a handmade paper, create an artwork, the natural understanding of the world is within the materials and the concepts involved. First and foremost, my studio is the think tank to create work and to ponder my observations and considerations of cycles and seasons past and the potential energy of the future. The natural world is ever present in my thinking as an artist and a craftsperson. I'm interested in origin, how things begin, how they happen, how they might have grown out of other ideas or efforts. These thoughts are what really lead my research. I think most of us can agree with the idea that humans are not as connected to the natural world as we once were. We have created everything around us from everything around us. And I think we don't spend enough time thinking about this. Reflection and rumination is not really there. We use wood, fallen and storm-damaged trees to heat the studio, to heat our house, to cook my paper fiber, and fire the wood kiln. Everything has potential to inspire. If you'll see in this photo, obviously the rounds of wood, but also the new addition is a 54-panel solar panel, which is what our entire farm is ran off now. And the studios is completely solar powered. Speaking of the wood and inspiration, a series of works were created with a lot of the logs that show up on our property. This series of works have a profound connection with a living organism. This is cast cotton on an inked log, which reveals the rings and the chainsaw marks equally. The red markings, which is a cross between Eastern and Western marbling processes, are my connection to this experience. So how do I gather my information? This is a big question that people ask. Nature can be so fleeting. So I use a tremendous amount of photographs, digital, actual paper photographs, which is what I prefer in the studio, to draw and to sketch from, as well as sketching in the moment. I record a lot of that information on handmade sketchbooks, love handmade paper that I've made myself. A lot of note taking, a lot of rumination, a lot of consideration that goes on, a lot of note taking, possibilities and research is done. These research sketchbooks don't necessarily become actual works. They are pretty much the precursor to the thoughts that become the works, other works. Yeah, I would say these sketchbooks do become works in and of themselves, but they really do record moments, fleeting time, long considerations. And I will go back to sketchbooks and rework some of the thoughts and ideas over again on the same page and rework those thoughts. There's also a lot of collection that goes on. Sometimes, and you can't take the notes, you have the actual object that is now has the animals have left, the flora has now passed on. So you're able to collect these objects and keep them and have another experience with them, or remember the experience that they brought. They trigger the memory. So I'm able to, this piece in particular is called Deep into the Earth, which is at the Robert C. Williams currently. And these works, and I have 3 of them to show you, are really ruminating on movement in nature, about the transformation of that energy that happens typically between summer and fall, which is a large point of time that I have to work on my work personally. I'm using pigmented cotton rag pulp as the mark making onto these particular sheets are also a base of a cotton rag pulp. They're approximately a 23 by 31. And I'm using cotton rag because I love the opacity it can create. And I also love the fact that you can pour it thinly to create like a screen so you can see other colorations or layers come through. The mark making, I find the way that the cotton flows with whatever tool I'm using at the moment to make the marks is a really exciting tool for me. I can make them slow, I can make them fast, thick and thin. So they really respond to these pieces, the mark making, about this sort of energy and movement within nature. This is my studio all the time. Cups of colored pulp all over the place. I'm constantly creating new palettes and pouring colors together and mixing. So these are all pigmented color cotton rag. Excuse me. The cotton rag has been beaten to a very small, and then they're highly pigmented fiber that is then used and applied onto a surface of a variety of surfaces. It's not always cotton rag. I will use a wheat straw as a backdrop. I'll use a millet. I'll use whatever fiber I'm sort of working at the moment in the studio as a production sheet, as a base sheet, unless there's some other purpose I need a particular base for. This is some of the work in process. So here I'm at the end of the summer maybe, and I'm able to work outside on a patio I built out the back of my studio, where I'm able to create these larger works that are typically a diptych or a triptych. I love working in panels. There's something about moments between, as well as the moments of the panel, that I consider important in a work. And I'm able to create a panoramic or a larger work. And you'll see a lot of these at the Robert C as well. This piece is there. This is the early stages of this piece. And you can see off to the far right where I have a piece that the third piece is not quite worked on as much as the piece on the very left. And so I'm using multiple devices, from a plastic spoon to a squeeze bottle to just a cup, as well as water. Water, I think, is basically one of the most important tools with working with this medium. And then I'm applying those and creating a larger work over the entire thing. I like to complete these within a day's time. So it might take me anywhere from 8 to 12 hours to complete a diptych, depending on what I'm doing. And I want to finish it and press it. I like working with that paper and that fiber at that really wet state while I'm working wet. This is it complete, but not yet pressed. And you can see the colors. It's really important that I make very rich colors. I'm really interested in that sort of vibrancy that color can bring, since I really think about that vibrancy when I'm working, when I'm in, that represents nature to me. Here's the piece completed. Like I said, it's at the Robert C. It's an amazing, these panels are about a 30 by 40 size. So there's 3 of them that creates this working merge. The last piece I want to show you is this collaborative artist book that I did with my husband, John Hook. It's called Mixed Greens, Mixed Genes. It's a playful book. It becomes a little off kilter the more you spend time with it, because it's based on the fact that the food is modified, as we know, to fit an economic demand, not necessarily flavor or a particular growing season. Some conventional strawberries have been modified with fish genes so they can handle colder weather, so they can be shipped during the off season. This seems not to really be about taste. It really seems to be about convenience and availability. If they're there, you would probably buy them, even if they don't really taste very good. I think people are somewhat out of touch of this seasonal growth. So this book, the pages are sewn directly into the ceramic tureen, and the pages are split down the center. These are handmade cotton rag circles, and the animals, insects, the fungus, the vegetables are all a woodcut. And on those pages, especially the one on the left where you see the cow and the pig, you see 2 stenciled images. There are a variety of stenciled images of the cycle of the frog. And the frog is very similar in nature to the canary in the mine. If there's something wrong in nature, the frog is the one that is the first indicator that your environment is troubled. And so I've put that onto these pages as the sort of backdrop as you're paging through, actually creating your own type of cuisine. Once again, I want to thank Jerusha and everybody, and Virginia at the Robert C. for letting me talk with you guys tonight.
Thank you, Andrea. I just wanted to share before we go on to our next speaker that Andrea has a book that she's written and published titled In the Field, A Study Guide for Processing Natural Fibers for Hand Paper Making. And these, we've got several signed copies at the Paper Museum that are available for purchase. We're going to go on to our next artist. So Chad Hayward was born in New Jersey and then moved to Castle Rock, Colorado with his family at age 7. He attended the School of Art Institute of Chicago and graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in 2017. He completed his MA in Studio Art at Eastern Illinois University in 2018, and Chad now lives and works in the Atlanta area.
Thank you so much, Jerusha. I'm going to go ahead and try and share my screen here, so just give me one moment. Excellent, thank you. So first off, I'd like to just start and say thank you to my co-exhibitors, Andrea and Lea. It's a real pleasure to show alongside of you, and it's really exciting to be part of this opportunity. I'd also like to thank everyone at the Robert C. Williams Papermaking Museum for all of their hard work putting this exhibition together. It's a real honor to be a part of it. So thank you so much. So today I'm going to share images with you from the exhibition, some of the works from the exhibition. And then while I'm showing you those images, I'm kind of going to investigate some of the ideas that are surrounding my practice and kind of influencing my artwork, and some sort of the research kind of going in to kind of fueling the work. So to start off, I typically like to describe myself as an interdisciplinary artist, someone that uses a variety of materials to make artworks. Today I'm going to mainly focus on paper making, obviously, because of this exhibition, but I'm going to talk a little bit about how paper making sort of positions itself in my overall artwork. So at the beginning of my journey with the paper-making material, I started working with it at the end of my undergraduate, and I was lucky enough to work with Andrea. And at the time, I was working with a variety of different materials, namely ceramics and painting and drawing materials. I like to think of myself as interdisciplinary, I really come to everything with a drawing and painting lens. That's kind of home base for me. And as I started working in the paper material, I was really struck by some of its kind of unique qualities and its ability to sort of kind of straddle a fence between the two-dimensional and the three-dimensional. And what I mean by this is sort of the process of paper coming to be. This is an image of a work in progress that you just saw. And the reason I'm showing this is I wanted to kind of illuminate the physical nature of paper making for me in the wet stage. This is the part for me that kind of exists as sculpture. When I began, of course I learned traditional methods of paper making, but I quickly began to manipulate the material with my hands. I instantly started touching and moving, scraping, smushing, and manipulating the material in a very physical, visceral way. And so for me, it began to kind of act more of as a sculptural material rather than sort of this 2D material. And the thing that I was really so fascinated with is there's this flip that happens in the paper making process, sort of at the end when the paper is dried and flattened. To me, then it kind of does this flip where it changes to the two-dimensional. It changes more towards a pictorial space, or it changes more towards the language of the image, kind of a drawing and painting type language. So I'm really interested in sort of the way that the process kind of can change from beginning to end and kind of encompasses a lot of these different modes of making that I'm really interested in. So one of the main themes that's kind of present throughout the work is this idea of space and depicting space. And the reason I'm showing you this image today is this is from Castle Rock, Colorado. This is where I grew up and spent the majority of my childhood. And as I got further into the arts and sort of reflected on the things from growing up that influenced me, I realized that the space that I experienced when in Colorado was a massive influence. And what I mean by that is the Rocky Mountains and the open sky sort of gave me this sense of space and landmark. The mountains always being to the west, and sort of being able to position myself within a space or in proximity to this natural landscape. So the way that translates into the work is sort of the way that these different objects or these orbs or these circles kind of position and interact with each other in this pictorial space. So it's sort of an ongoing interest. One interview that really struck me was with the artist Barnett Newman, the abstract painter, and he was talking about Cézanne's apples. And when describing the apples, he talked about them as having a certain type of visual weight, and he used the word cannonballs. And when he described the apples this way, it really made something click for me in the way that we sort of digest visual information. All of these different circles, all of these different colors, they interact and they have different visual weights. And so that sort of kind of plays into this idea of space and how all of these different objects kind of orient themselves in space. Another thing that I'm really fascinated with in this art making process is the psychological space that the artist occupies while making. Several years ago, I read this book by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who's a psychologist who characterized what he calls a flow state. And he sort of describes it as really the optimal experience of kind of human existence. Another way I would describe flow state is sort of being in the zone. This is something that I think we all experience in kind of a myriad of ways across our life. But one of the main characteristics he points to as being in this flow state or being in the zone is sort of this sense of loss of time and space. And so when I read this book, it sort of clicked for me that, oh, wow, when things are going well in the studio, I'm in this flow state, I'm in the zone. How do I sort of channel that or achieve that? Because not every day in the studio is like that. Around that time, I began working with a lot more repetition and a lot more pattern. And the way I started thinking about these patterns and these repetitious marks, specifically the dot that you see kind of as a theme throughout the work, I started thinking of this way of working as kind of a portal into this psychological space, into this kind of flow or this in the zone type psychological being in the studio. So I began kind of utilizing repetition as a way to access that space. And in many ways, these works are also images of portals in a way, or of a doorway, or things of that nature. So one of my main interests with using repetition is kind of, or the circle, I should say, because a lot of people will ask me, what's with the circle? Why do you kind of employ that? And when I was thinking about what I'm interested in the work, it's formal qualities are one of the things that draws me to art making, kind of the formal qualities of different materials. For example, how color exists in different materials, how color exists in paper pulp, how it may exist in paint or ceramics or glaze or dye. So as a way to kind of make a painting about these formal aspects or these formal qualities, I decided to sort of reduce the gesture or the form or the vehicle that sort of carries the content. And I kind of reduced it to this simplified gesture that could be kind of deployed across a variety of materials, and I came to the circle. So in many ways, it's the most simplified gesture that I could come up with, sort of a dot, a touch of a brush, or the imprint of a finger. You can sort of see evidence of that in kind of the center of this piece. A lot of those sort of circle marks in the very center are actually from the finger. So there's, touch in different ways with different tools being deployed kind of across materials. This is an image of the work in progress. So I'll go back really quick just so you can see the final. The reason I'm including this is I just wanted to, again, kind of illustrate the physicality of the wet pulp or the making process at this stage, and how I'm sort of dealing with the material. So another theme that's present in the work is a theme kind of centered around the micro and the macro. I'm very interested in the structures that make up our world, both at the microorganism type level. So this is a microscopic image of a morning glory pollen, but also on the flip side, on the macro side, looking at astronomy and images of the galaxy or space as a way to sort of influence my work. And I'm very curious about works that can simultaneously contain both of these things. They can seem like they're images or depictions of the micro world and also the macro world. And I'm sort of interested in those similarities of natural structure. One of the last things I want to talk about this evening is kind of the post-paper production or the sort of next step in the studio for me. All of these works contain paper making or pulp imaging, but in a way that's actually just a beginning for me. So after the pulp imaging process, the paper making process, I bring those flattened sheets back into the studio and I hang them up and live with them for a little bit. And the way I think about painting or readdressing the surface, I think a lot about painting as sort of a game, a puzzle, a dance. It's like chess. And so for me, the paper surface or these initial gestures or colors that I employed in that stage of the making kind of acts as the first move. And when it enters into the dry studio, the drawing and painting studio, I then readdress that as if it's a new beginning. So this is an example, kind of the center is a lot of the pulp, and then sort of these marks on top are painting and drawing materials. And while I'm working in the studio, I'm often working on anywhere from 10 to 30 images at once. And so what happens is these works become intertwined with each other. A color that's happening in one work often finds itself in another, or as I enter the studio and kind of spend some time with the works, I'll react to one, and once I'm using that color or using a particular type of strategy, I find a solution for another work nearby. So in a way, they're interconnected and they grow as a body. And so that's sort of how they progress in the painting and drawing studio. So at this point, I just want to thank you all for being here this evening. And I also want to just include some brief information if you wanted to kind of follow along with what I'm up to or see any of the other artworks that I do. You can find me at chadhaywardart.com or my Instagram. And if you have any questions or like to get in touch with me, chadehayward@gmail.com. Thank you so much, everyone.
Just before I introduce Lea, if you are intrigued by Chad's presentation, he will be conducting a free virtual pulp painting demonstration on Tuesday, May 25th from 7:30 to 8:30 as part of exhibition-related programming. And again, that's a free virtual program. All right. And last but not least, we have Lea Basile-Lazarus. Lea Basile-Lazarus received her BA in Art Education from the College of New Jersey and her MFA with a concentration in printmaking from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She has been teaching for over 25 years. After teaching art for 16 years in Winnetka District 36, Lea retired from public school education and then spent the next 5 years teaching visual arts at Beacon Academy, a Montessori high school in Evanston. Through her years of teaching, Lea has worked with Chicago Public Schools on collaborative social justice art projects. She has been a recipient of a teacher Fulbright trip to Japan, spending 3 weeks abroad learning about Japan's culture, art, and education system. And through a nonprofit organization called Do Your Part, Lea was sent to Africa to visit Ghanaian schools and villages. These experiences have affected the images that she has created over the years. Lea has been a printmaker for over 40 years. Currently, she makes monotypes, which are one-of-a-kind prints, and paper pulp paintings that incorporate multiple layers of colors, shapes, images, and textures. Lea has exhibited her work throughout the Chicagoland area. Over the past few years, Lea has had solo shows at 1100 Florence Gallery in Evanston, the Center of Halsted, Chicago, and Lil Street Arts Center in Chicago. She has also participated in two-person print and poetry shows at the Noyce Cultural Arts Center and the Evanston Public Library. She has recently moved to the Pacific Northwest, where she hopes to continue making and exhibiting her artwork. All right.
Thank you so much, Jerusha. It is an honor and privilege to be part of this fabulous conversation that we're having about our artwork. I consider myself a printmaker, paper maker, and educator, as you heard. Next slide, Jerusha. I think we've all talked about the process of paper making, the process. I will talk about the process of printmaking and the process of paper making. I love processes. I love layering. I love color. I think that my brain works in a way that process is really, really important. And I don't really stop too often to breathe. So continually going through these processes does make me happy. Next slide. And as Andrea talked about colors, I find mixing my paper pulp colors to be meditative, similar to Sumier painters who get their ink ready. It is a process where it takes a while, and it allows the artist to think about what's going to happen in the next few hours. Next slide, please. The game changer for me and my artwork was the Women's March in 2017. I'm going to take you through 6 years of printmaking and paper making. And really, I would say that the Women's March was influential on the direction that my artwork took. And I think all of us have talked about how we all deeply, deeply think about what we do and think about the images we create and the processes we use. This image on the right is a paper litho. Actually just a Xerox copy for a paper litho. That's why the text is backwards. But in between making my abstract work, I do take a lot of photographs of things that are happening around me. And you'll see later how I used these paper lithos in an installation that I created. Next, please. I was fortunate enough to be able to take paper making at Oxbow with Andrea. Chad and I have both been her students, and so lucky to be able to go to Oxbow. I would totally encourage any artists out there to go there for a couple of weeks and take her class. It was very inspiring and a game changer for me, and my art has taken many twists because of paper making and the information I've gained from being Andrea's student. So I came to Oxbow in 2017 with all of these stencils with text from the posters and banners that I saw at the Women's March. It was just this very powerful experience. And I knew that I was going to use these powerful words and images of shadows. I take a lot of photographs, like I said, and for a long period of time, I was taking photographs of shadows of me and other people that I know. So I was using these shadows along with these texts to create these Women's March or political pieces. Next slide, please. The piece on the right is probably the first piece I made at Oxbow that summer. Kind of my shadows kind of creeping in there, and then using my text from these stencils that I made, laboriously made actually. And then my work in 2 weeks took a turn. I learned that I didn't have to just use the text from these stencils, that it didn't always matter that the words were readable to the audience, that the movement of writing these words on my images became really important. So my work changed a little bit. Actually, I think for the better. My work became a little more expressive, and I was using these shadows of figures, and then all of a sudden, these houses kind of began to creep into my work. Next slide, please. Back to the figures. So I had this thought, why not take these figures off my paper and make them stand alone as figures, and to create my own form of Woman's March or People's March. Next slide, please. And here are all the figures that I created that summer at Oxbow, and kind of an installation at our critique. Next slide, please. And I just had to put this in just to let you know how wonderful Oxbow is. I'm giving Oxbow a big plug here. And if Judy and Lori are in the audience, a shout out to both of you. All right, next slide, please. I began experimenting with paper pulp because, as Chad said, it is kind of a sculpture when you're working with paper pulp wet, and you watch the layers and layers build up and become this three-dimensional art piece. And then when it's pressed and dried, it becomes a two-dimensional piece of work, just like Chad said. So before I went through the pressing and drying process, I decided to see what would happen if I actually scooped out some of the pulp. And this image is a result of that. Again, a combination of my figures and these houses kind of emerging in my work. Next slide, please. Just some process pictures of me using my stencils. This is some insulation that I had that Andrea introduced me to, actually, and it's a great way to make stencils. So these, I had 50, 60, 70 stencils that I would rotate and reuse over and over again. And as you can see, if you look really closely to the slide on the right, you can actually see the three-dimensional quality of the paper pulp before we press it and dry it. Next slide, please. So the houses begin to take over. And in thinking of my houses in my work, I think about the home being a safe place, a place where people can go and no harm will be done to them. And I think of community, and I think of people gathering in these homes. So I think of these houses, actually, they could be people. They could be a house. They could be a place of worship. They could be a place of safety. Next slide, please. Just some samples of my pieces at this time. Next slide, please. And then 2018, 2019, my pieces got a little more complicated, a little more layered, a lot more textured. I started using hot glue as a writing tool. I should talk about some of the tools that we all probably have used in making our paper. Turkey basters, syringes, a bucket of water with a little bit of pulp. Water is this vitally important part of creating these images, and lots of stencils made either out of Pelon or this insulation. So as you can see on the piece on the right, some of those houses begin to look drawn and, a little raggedy maybe, or a little expressive. Okay, next slide, please. I've been known to draw, paint, oil pastel, sew on my pieces. I don't do that all the time. I often like to finish my artwork in the paper studio, but then sometimes I get things home and I look at it and I just think it just needs a little more work. In this piece, you can see a couple of figures kind of floating in the background there. Next slide, please. So the next summer, this summer, 2018-19, I wanted to make some more figures. I was having a show in Evanston at a gallery, and I wanted to create an installation, which you will see, that expressed my feelings about the Women's March and the marches that were happening all over the United States. These images were created, again, by photographs that I took, and so I traced and blew up their figures and created these large standalone demonstrators, basically. Next slide, please. You'll see me working at Andrea's, cutting out my stencils and using a big screen, pouring my pulp in these stencils and letting them air dry, drying slowly so they wouldn't wrinkle. And they become part of a bigger installation. Next slide, please. And here we are at 1100 Florence. My installation of all my figures, and also going back to those paper lithos and collaging them, creating poster-like, banner-like, march-like images. And so this is my interpretation of the marches that I participated in. Next slide, please. Here are my paper pulp pieces being displayed at the gallery. Next slide, please. So I'm working with these houses, and I thought, I should try to make them three-dimensional. Houses are three-dimensional. So I started playing around with wire, and I used abaca stretched around these sculptural houses. And as I got bigger with these houses, I realized that as the abaca dried, it actually changed the form of my sculptures, and my sculptures became alive. So this sense of these figures in my artwork and these houses, I think they change the role. They are the same role. They're interchangeable, I think. And so creating these three-dimensional sculptures, and I wouldn't consider myself a sculptor, but I loved watching the process of these houses dry and actually becoming human. Next slide, please. These pieces come out of a series of, they were the largest pieces that I made. They are 48 by 32. Pretty large for me and a little scary, but I was really excited about the end result. Again, I'm using this hot glue as a block out. And I say that now because later you're going to see me use them in printmaking. I used my stencils, I used hot glue, I used turkey basters, this is a very physical process. I love the fact that my body is moving when I make these pieces. I, too, like to work on more than one piece at one time, giving myself time to think between each piece that I make. Next slide, please. So here's how my printmaking and paper making got connected through these hot glue stencils that I made. On the right is a paper piece, a paper pulp painting, and on the left is a print. It took me about a year and a half to realize that, oh, these glue drawings that I'm making can be inked and printed on my paper. This was a game changer for me, and actually brought my prints to a new level, bringing them really life and a ton of energy. That's what I felt was seen, and I felt that while I was making my paper pieces, that I was just bringing my energy and my freneticness to the paper pieces, and now I'm doing the same thing in printmaking. Next slide, please. Again, a paper pulp painting on the right and a print on the left. Next slide, please. Two prints that I created with a little bit of gold leaf. I have grown to really like metallic pigments, so and you'll see some of that in my later pieces. Okay, next slide, please. The next few slides are just some of the pieces that are in the Museum of Paper Making show right now, or pieces that are not there. So these are paper pulp paintings that you're going to see. Okay, Jerusha, thank you. Next slide. Next slide, please. And then I realized, oh, I can use the hot glue drawings, stencils that I'm making for embossments. And I'm still embossing. I find the process so satisfying, creating these white marks on a white piece of paper. And then I go back into them, and I do a lot of hand coloring, and I have over the last year become obsessed with small mark making. We all love mark making. That's so exciting to see that we all do that. Then COVID happened last year. And what did we all do those first 2 months of COVID? Well, I repurposed artwork. I began weaving my paper pulp paintings, and I repurposed them and started weaving them. And it was very therapeutic, I thought. And then I printed and hand painted on them. Next slide, please. Again, using hot glue my hot glue stencils to print with, and then as embossments. Next slide. Two more of my woven paper pulp painting pieces with prints and hand painting on them. Next slide, please. Last summer, it was a big summer. It was the summer before the election. It was the summer that George Floyd was murdered. You know, there was a lot going on, and there was a lot of tension, and there was just a lot to see on the news. So my pieces became, oh no, it's fine. You can change. Yes. So last summer, I took a road trip to Seattle, and I walked the streets of Capitol Hill where protesters camped out, and the art that I saw, the signs that I saw, the things that I saw and photographed were amazing. And so I did a series of paper lithos that reflect what I saw. Next slide, please. And then I did a series of paper pieces, and this is me going through the process of getting my pulp ready to make that base sheet of paper. Next slide, please. And here are those glue stencils that I've been talking about for the last few minutes, and how on the left you can see that they're black. Well, I used these in my prints already, so there was black ink dried on the back of them. Placing them on wet paper pulp and basically throwing watered down pulp on them, they were a blockout. So the textures that were created by these were so very different than I saw in my prints. It was very exciting. Next slide, please. Me making my works in progress. Next slide, please. And the next few slides are just the results of my paper pieces that were made last summer. Yep, you keep on going. Thank you. Next slide, please. And then I moved to Gig Harbor, Washington, as Jerusha said. I didn't realize how that was going to change my life. The world is green out here, and even through the winter, everything was green. There was no ice. There was no snow. There was this beautiful Mount Rainier facing me every time I went on the highway, every time I went on a walk. So my work, the piece on the left was a piece that I made after the election, which is the text in it says, "Hang in there, help is on the way." And the piece on the right shows how the Pacific Northwest has impacted me, putting that Mount Rainier right in the center of my embossed print. Next slide, please. Again, that majestic Mount Rainier. Next slide. Just some smaller pieces that I've been working on. They're embossed and then hand painted. Next slide. Repurposing paper pulp images, cutting them in strips, collaging them, and hand painting them. Next slide. And I'll end my talk with showing you this brand new series of images, 5 prints, not paper pulp images, but prints that I made. And the process of making these prints are in a video that Jerusha will post at some point over the next couple of months. These 5 prints, like my paper pulp pieces, I like working in multiples at a time. This was about a 3-week process of printing, changing colors, layering, just like paper pulp painting. I like to layer all my images. And using stencils, using mark making, and using my glue stencils. The meaning behind these pieces is twofold. One, spring was happening in Washington. Spring happens in Washington in early March. People are gardening, flowers are blooming. So I use these really rich, intense colors. But also the trial of Chauvin was being aired, and the tension in the air with the trial happening, and hopefully the good result that ended with him being charged with the murder of George Floyd. So these pieces, Jerusha, you can go to the next slide, is just a series of spring-like colors, but with that intensity, heat of the trial, the Chauvin trial. So anyway, that is the end of my slide presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lea. I am realizing that it is 8:57. I do want to take a quick look at the Q&A just to see if we can answer. I know some people may have to go right at 9. So I'm going to do my thank yous and then open up for questions. So I'd just like to thank the panelists and everyone who's attended the artist talk. And if you'd like to see the work but can't make it to the museum, please visit our website, paper.gatech.edu. You can see the work as it is installed in our gallery. And also, if you enjoyed this programming and are excited about the artist talk and the video that we mentioned, and would like to see us produce other quality programming, please consider giving a donation to the museum. Once again, Chad's demo is Tuesday, May 25th from 7:30 to 8:30, and there's information on our website at paper.gatech.edu. Do we have any questions?
We do have a couple questions. We have one from Ann Silverman asking, Chad Hayward, do you think also about mandalas or Australian Aboriginal work? They both seem to address space, journey, and destination.
Hey, Anne, thank you so much for that question. Yeah, I definitely do think about these things. That is probably the most common remark that I get about my work is the relationship to the Australian Aboriginal work. That's something that comes up often. I by no means am an expert or a scholar on that work, but I am aware of it, and I do find it wonderful, and I am struck by sort of like the kind of universal quality that work has in its kind of simplified, repetitive gestures. And I am certainly also influenced by the mandala form. As I mentioned, a lot of kind of the works in the show depict kind of like a portal or a doorway, and I would argue that those mandalas are also that. So yeah, I am thinking about those. Thank you so much for that question.
For you, Chad. It is from Carrie Williams asking specifically what size are your pieces? I'm not sure which one she was referring to, but if you would just talk a little bit about the size of your artwork.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you didn't miss it, Carrie. I didn't mention that in the presentation, so thanks for that question. Most of these works in this exhibition, I would say, range from the smallest is probably about 11 by 15, and then it gets up into the kind of 20 by 30 range, probably at the larger end. So fairly moderate scale. I do work at larger and smaller sizes, but in this exhibition, it's relatively moderate scale.
Our last question is from Deborah Landry asking more about the use.
Oh, your sound went out, Anna. So she said, tell me more about hot glue. So how are you actually creating those stencils?
Well, that was a genius process method that Andrea taught me, and I have taken it and I use it all the time. You just really, you just set up your hot glue gun and you draw with it. I draw with it on glass. You can do it on metal so that you can just peel it off, but it is an easy process, and you can get some amazing results. It does hurt your hand when you first start doing it because you are using that hot glue gun a lot. But it can get some great expressive marks for you. And I love the multi-purpose that of the material itself, that I use it for negative or positive in my images.
And I had a question for Andrea, because you actually, my understanding is you pulled together this show. Am I correct in that?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess my question is, because you come in contact with a lot of paper makers.
A lot.
Yeah. So what was it about? What was the conversation that you saw in your work and Leah's and Chad's that made you think of putting this together?
Well, as they both mentioned, they have been. I've worked with them. They've worked with me, so to speak, and we've shared a lot of experiences. And I'm kind of picky, Jerusha, who I work with, and I think what I see in Chad and Leah's work, even though it might visually look completely different, there's definitely a wholeness about the way that they think about things in a very compassionate way. And I think it really speaks to the human soul and mind at the same time. So there's this kind of, I guess, I don't mean to sound corny, but I think there's this sort of inner beauty about the work and how meaningful it is. And I think that's what, and so when we were looking at a title for the show, the word ruminate really stuck to me, because I think both these artists think extremely deeply, and that's always been something that has come across since the first day I met both of them. How intensely they think about their subject matter, the material that they're using. And if you noticed how both of them did mention the three-dimensional quality about really understanding or wanting to understand, become part of the material, to really collaborate with that. And I think you can, once you unite that, you have that experience. It's really powerful, and I think you can get your ideas across in a really powerful way. And so I thought we all connected on that same level. At least that's how I would speak to it. They might say something else, but I really think that was and I think what was so interesting was how differently we all approach the medium with this very sincere thought and effort. So that's kind of what I thought.
And I had one other question, because that one was, you were talking about other folks' work, but in your work, you have, in the gallery, you have very abstracted works, and then pieces that they're still abstracted, but they're representational, like you can say that's, cotton, or are you jumping back and forth between those two ways of seeing, or did you migrate from working in one way to working in the other?
I have to say it all looks the same to me. It doesn't, I mean, I see things, Jersha, in all of them. And some people can see more things or less than I can see. So I guess it doesn't, it all look, like I said, it all looks the same to me. So
We have two more questions in the chat. One of them is from Jake Rosenbluth, asking Lee, will houses give way to trees now that you are in the Northwest?
So interesting, Jake, my friend, to ask me that question. I am about to start a little venture with the trees because a new friend of mine loves trees and wants to make a trade with me. So I am going to start my adventure in experimenting with drawing with hot glue and making these organic trees. So that was a brilliant question because I've already been thinking about that. Thank you for asking that question.
And then the last question of the night.
Do you collaborate often with your husband? For Andrea.
Oh, I could be snarky, but I'm not. I would say we built our studios back to back, so we have constant interaction. And I feel very lucky to be able to walk in his studio and be like, what do you think of this? Or can you participate with this? Can you, either through critique, we're constantly talking about work. We're constantly thinking, well, maybe this should have paper, maybe this should have clay, maybe this should be wood fired, maybe this should. So in a sense, it's a daily activity. I don't know how much of collaboration, I don't know. I mean, actual works, yes, we do several, but it's usually because either one of us has an idea like this needs to have both these union parts. But usually we're always collaborating on ideas continually and getting feedback. So I always consider that a serious collaboration as well.
All right. So it is a little after 9. We're going to close out. And I did say that was the last question, but Chad, I wanted to know, have you thought about allowing your pieces to air dry to try and capture some of the the hills and valleys that happen when you're working your fingers into the pulp?
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably not enough. I would say my go-to is usually attempting to flatten the work. I mean, I'm sure as you handled it, some of it sort of bows and waves a little bit. But yeah, in most cases, it doesn't retain that sort of sculptural quality that it has during the wet stage. I have experimented a bit with air drying or crumpling the paper in its wet stage and unfolding it and working with it kind of after it's been crumpled where there's lots of creases, kind of thinking about the materiality of that. But yeah, no, it's not something I've investigated a ton, and it is something I'm very interested in because like I said, I am curious about that sort of in-between space of kind of 2D and 3D. So I love that question. Yeah, it's something I would love to investigate more in the future, kind of playing with that drawing strategy.
Thank you. I really enjoyed hearing all of you speak about your work, and just would like to thank you again, and thank you to the folks that stuck in there with us during our Q&A. Once again, you can get information on Chad's demo as well as getting to see how the work is installed in the at the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking on our website, paper.gatech.edu. And with that, I'll wish you all a good night.